Hello, I'm Esther Githu-Ewart. It's Wednesday, April 12th. This is Africa 54. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is calling for the World Bank to undertake additional reforms this year to expand its ability to help developing countries meet global challenges. We'll have analysis on critical issues impacting Africa. The 9th edition of the Africa Fintech Summit is underway in Washington, D.C. Wednesday with representatives from leading innovators, investors and government representatives in attendance. We'll have a live report from the summit. And U.S. President Joe Biden is in Ireland meeting leaders to discuss a 1998 peace agreement that ended over a quarter century of sectarian conflict in British-held Northern Ireland between pro-British Unionists and nationalists. We'll tell you what's at stake. On the sidelines of the IMF meetings in Washington, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen hosts global finance officials Wednesday, and she is expected to call on the World Bank to undertake additional reforms this year to expand its ability to help developing countries meet global challenges such as reducing extreme poverty and climate change. Meanwhile, the IMF is trimming its global growth forecast and advising central banks to keep up the pressure to drive down inflation. Here's Paul Ndiho with more.
The International Monetary Fund says the global economic outlook for this year is looking bleak due to high inflation, escalating interest rates, and uncertainty causing governments and central banks to tighten financial conditions. On Tuesday, the IMF downgraded its projection for global economic growth, estimating a development rate of 2.8% this year, down from its previous estimation of 3.4% for 2022 and 2.9% for 2023.
In our latest forecast, global growth will bottom out at 2.8% this year, before rising modestly to 3% next year, almost unchanged from our January projections.
The IMF chief economist also noted that while a significant banking crisis is not in forecast, the financial conditions could worsen, resulting in nervous investors testing the next weakest link in the financial system.
The recent banking instability reminds us, however, that the situation remains fragile. Once again, downside risks dominate. Inflation is much stickier than anticipated, even a few months ago. While global inflation has declined, this reflects mostly the sharp reversal in energy and food prices.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen on Tuesday voiced her concerns regarding the global economy's downside risks at the IMF and the World Bank meetings.
I've not really seen evidence at this stage suggesting a contraction in credit, although that is a possibility. I believe our banking system remains strong and resilient. It has solid capital and liquidity, and the U.S. economy is obviously performing exceptionally well.
Despite risks, the IMF report indicated that the 2008 global financial crisis had taught banks to become more cautious, better preparing them for the existing turmoil. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
Now, for more on topics being discussed at the World Bank IMF meetings, joining me live via Skype from Harrisonburg, Virginia, is Sambo Muzata, Assistant Professor of Public Budgeting at James Madison University. Professor, welcome to Africa 54. All right, we lost Professor, so we'll move on and hopefully we get her back. We're going to go to Mike Hovey. We have more topics for you today being discussed also at the FinTech Summit here in Washington, D.C. It's the 9th annual Africa Fintech Summit, and it's underway here. Innovators, regulators, investors, and enablers are gathering there together to focus on leading issues impacting Africa and the diaspora. And with industry insight coming directly from change makers themselves. For more specifics on the activities, let's go to VOA's Mike Hovey, who is standing by live for us there. Mike, tell us all about the event. What are you seeing?
Thank you, Esther. There's a lot of activity happening here in Washington, D.C. Today at the Africa Fintech Summit, that is the 2023 Africa Fintech Summit. Now, this summit is the 9th summit that has been held. The summit itself has been held across different parts of the world, but it's the 5th time that it's been here in Washington, D.C. Just a couple of proceedings that have happened so far. We've seen a couple of officials from State Department talking about how the U.S. is investing in the Africa fintech sector. And one thing they've expressed, which are sentiments that have been expressed time and time again by authorities that have visited the continent, is that the U.S. government is excited by innovation that's coming out of the continent. And of course, they're looking forward to partnering with the continent to improve the fintech sector.
Mike, if I come there, tell me, give me the highlights of the major players. Who should I see first and why?
Yeah, so a couple of major players that have been highlighted. As I mentioned, we had the gentleman from the State Department speaking. A couple of minutes ago, I spoke to a young innovator, Benjamin Fernandez from Tanzania. He's also someone that has been commended big time by the U.S. government. He hails all the way from Tanzania. He's raised a lot of money that has been able to benefit the East African nations fintech sector. So those are a couple of players that we've spoken to so far, and more are going to be coming off on our website.
What really is the takeaway for Africa? Most of this, as we say, they're from Africa. They're showcasing this in Washington, D.C. But what does the continent get out of this?
Now, here, in terms of the continent and what it's receiving, of course, aside from partnership with the U.S. government, it's investment in the youth. It's investment in the startup companies. It's investment in the women. It's investment in agriculture. It's investment in different sectors. Now, as I had a conversation with a couple of young folks, some of them who are showcasing their products here, one thing they really commended is how fintech is growing on the continent. And the reason why they say fintech is growing, besides the fact that we have several different challenges, i.e. infrastructure, etc., is because they firmly believe that fintech is addressing everyday issues on the continent. And the U.S. government is seeing that, and that's why they have decided, no, Africa is the next innovative spot, and they are looking to pour money into it.
Mike, I'm just curious because you are our digital guy here. What is your biggest interest in what you're watching out there today?
Well, so far they're yet to showcase the products. They're going to have a competition later on where they're going to be showcasing products. But through conversations that I've had, once again, I keep bringing his name up. Benjamin has the highest product there that really piqued my interest as a digital person. The reason being, Benjamin is addressing an issue that is really permanent on the continent, and that is remittance. That is money that is being sent from the diaspora all the way back to the continent. And as highlighted by some experts that I've spoken to today, that seems to be one big issue. At times you'll have someone that sends you money and you're back home, and of course it takes a couple of days for you to receive it. So to have someone that is playing in that field and addressing that and ensuring that people can get their money in a timely manner, that's definitely a good thing that's coming out so far.
Mike, thank you very much for your reporting. VOA's Mike Hovey reporting live for us from Washington, D.C. I'm going to circle back to the events that are happening here in Washington, D.C., where the World Bank and IMF meetings are ongoing. And I'm joined live via Skype from Harrisonburg, Virginia, by Sombo Muzata, Assistant Professor of Public Budgeting at James Madison University. Professor Muzata, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you so much, Esther. I'm glad to be here.
You know, this has been a big topic lately. Help us understand the key factors that have led to some of the huge debts we're hearing about in the continent and what IMF and the World Bank can do to reduce these huge burdens on the African countries.
Yeah, I think the debt problem has been there for a while now, and we'd hoped that when countries had reached the HIPC completion point, in reference here, I'm thinking about Zambia, things would have been sustained on a positive note and not being in this trap again. But look at where we're at. It's not only Zambia, it's a number of countries on the continent, and some are really so shocked So we saw that before the pandemic, the issue really was borrowing in order to support infrastructure projects and also to modernize. But during the pandemic, the debt burden went up in order for countries to sustain themselves and feed their citizens. So we saw that there was a shift in the motivation for borrowing, from borrowing to build infrastructure to borrowing to sustain and just be able to survive. Looking at what the IMF and the World Bank can do, I think we need to be thinking about long-term solutions to the problems that we have around debt. We've been at this conversation for way too long a time. I'll give an example in the case of Zambia, in the 1970s, the reduction of the price of copper on the global market and, the shortages that we'd had coming forth and changes around procurement of oil. All those things had affected the country negatively, and we were on our knees with the debt problem. It's just 30 years plus 50 years. We're back at the same problem. So I think that the way the World Bank can help developing countries is not only looking at short-term solutions, but helping countries to come up with long-term solutions in how they're going to manage their debt effectively.
Professor, very quickly, ordinary citizens are the ones bearing the brunt of these huge debts, and they're never included in these conversations. How can they be included so they know my government is taking this much debt and this is what they are promising, this is how they're going to pay this debt? Very briefly.
That's a very interesting question, Esther. It borders both on politics and administration. So the political aspect, we would need our citizens to be effective participants in what is happening in their countries. But we don't see that happening. Citizens only participate when there are elections taking place. Beyond the elections, it's like citizens aren't even there. So I think that the responsibility for citizens' engagement in the debt conversations lies at each country level. And then I think largely also citizens have to take keen interest and organize so that they can be able to contribute to these conversations. I think it doesn't have to be just a few individuals within civil society organizations taking part in this. We have to come up with a way in which we engage people bottom up.
Right. Professor, thank you very much. We hope to get you back as these meetings continue. Professor Muzata, Sombo Muzata is an assistant professor of public budgeting at James Madison University. A 50% shortfall in funds this year is forcing the United Nations World Food Programme to cut off the food supply for hundreds of thousands of refugees in Uganda, which hosts more than any other country in Africa. Olivia Chan has more.
Susan Konga has been preparing her kitchen garden for the next harvest in a refugee camp in northern Uganda. This year, the success of her tireless cultivation will be put to the test. Konga will have to rely entirely on her vegetable patch.
I have children, of course, that I'm paying in school. So if I can sustain on myself alone, will the food be enough that I can cultivate to eat and sell part of it to sustain my children? It cannot.
Global crises like the war in Ukraine, the earthquake in Turkey, and the drought in East Africa mean there's less food aid for people like Konga. A 50% shortfall in funds this year has forced the United Nations World Food Programme to cut off the food supply for hundreds of thousands of refugees in Uganda. The country hosts more refugees than any other country in Africa. World Food Programme says vulnerable refugees such as new arrivals, the sick and elderly, will continue to receive emergency food aid. But the organization's $180 million funding shortfall means others will have to wean off it. Konga will be one of them. Marcus Pryor is Uganda's country director for the World Food Programme.
Donors are having to make very difficult decisions because the needs are enormous globally. But as far as Uganda is concerned, we're not only competing for visibility on a global scale, we're competing for visibility in the region as well.
For Konga, the change in policy will be a hard adjustment. She will struggle to survive during the periods between harvests.
Not everyone will get food, but I plead to them, they should at least give food for everyone, since we are not yet stable.
That was Olivia Chan of Reuters reporting. 4 years have passed since a popular uprising in Sudan led to the military to overthrow President Omar al-Bashir, but hopes for civilian rule have not been fulfilled. Sudan's pro-democracy movement is struggling with the military for power. Henry Wilkins reports from Khartoum on the state of Sudan's iconic revolution.
For the protesters who took part in the revolution that ousted Sudan's military ruler of 3 decades, Omar al-Bashir, the civilian government they dream of still proves elusive. In October 2021, after just 18 months of civilian rule, a new military junta took power in a coup and remains in charge of the country. Mohammed Ali, an organiser of almost daily protests in Khartoum, says the military should be under the control of a democratic government.
I mean, the military authority should not be independent and isolated. This is the essential step to guarantee the process of democratization. People must believe in this.
The military government has said for months that it will put in place a transitional government and move to a civilian rule. A draft political agreement to bring that about was due to be signed on April 6, but was postponed at the last minute. A politician involved in the negotiations told VOA in March,
this broad-based government, we need it. Actually, we need it desperately for the success of the coming interim period. Plan B, we might look into having caretaker government for short period, 1 to 3 months. Meanwhile, we try to settle our disputes.
But the protesters say this process should not be extended any further. They point out that civil servants and teachers have not been paid in months, and the functions of the state are at a standstill. Jibril Ibrahim, the Minister of Finance, told VOA in March,
political forces need to sit around the table and find a way to form that civilian government. And I don't think that's impossible. We are close now.
Analysts say military rulers are looking to drag out the move to civilian rule in order to consolidate power.
The longer that this stretches on, I think the more ability the military has further hide its hand in financial corporations, to develop deeper, diplomatic ties that will counterbalance the pressure coming from internal sources or from external sources.
Hala Al-Karouk, with the Strategic Initiative for Women in Africa, says the lack of progress creates
very dangerous situation, in my view. Because Sudan already are very volatile. The military coup has failed to assign an executive government. The overall situation is highly problematic. Add to that the issue of insecurity in all conflict and post-conflict region. It's becoming very, very devastating and very scary.
The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, has expressed alarm at the rising tensions and called for a renewed push towards civilian rule to resolve the situation. Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Khartoum.
Still to come, U.S. President Joe Biden is in Northern Ireland to discuss a peace agreement that ended over 25 years of sectarian conflict. We'll be right back.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, we'll take a look at a court ruling that is likely to decide the fate of tens of thousands of Zimbabweans living and working in South Africa. Also, my interview with Chris Maroleng from Good Governance Africa about why we're seeing a rise in populism as well as democratic backsliding in some parts of Africa and around the world. Join me, Heidi Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
In other news, Tunisia's Coast Guard says 10 migrants trying to reach Europe from sub-Saharan Africa drowned Wednesday off the coast of the North African country near the town of Sfax after their boat was wrecked in Mediterranean. The Coast Guard says 72 migrants were rescued and 10 bodies were recovered. The United Nations Children's Fund says over 2,000 schools in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo have had to close because of armed conflict. More than 750,000 children are having their education disrupted by insecurity in the provinces of North Kivu and Ituri, according to UNICEF estimates. And Ghanaian officials say they have sent 1,000 troops and police to the northern area of Baku to reinforce security after gunmen killed an immigration officer and wounded 2 others near the border with Burkina Faso last week. U.S. President Joe Biden landed in Belfast, Northern Ireland on Wednesday. He joins leaders there to discuss a 1998 peace agreement that ended over 25 years of sectarian conflict. VOA's Anita Powell reports.
President Joe Biden often mentions his Irish roots, but this trip is no vacation, he says. As he left for Belfast in Northern Ireland, Biden stressed the importance of a 1998 agreement that brought peace to the island after decades of sectarian strife between mostly Catholic nationalists who wished to unite with neighboring Ireland and mostly Protestant Unionists who wished to remain within the UK.
What's your top priority on this trip, sir? Make sure the Irish Accords and the Windsor Agreement stay in place. Keep the peace. That's the main thing.
That is a big lift. That peace has been tested by the UK's 2016 vote to leave the European Union, taking Northern Ireland with it and leaving the rest of the island in the EU. Analysts say there is bipartisan will in the US to see the island succeed. They point to 2 ways the world's wealthiest nation can encourage stability: with attention and with money.
There can be investments in the region, there can be special envoys that remain invested, and then I think there also needs to be effort put into trust building. After the Good Friday Agreement, we all kind of assumed the peace was done. Really, that was the moment to kick up the efforts in high gear.
The situation has degenerated since the Brexit vote, and the Windsor framework that Biden described has not won support from Northern Ireland's pro-UK political party. They have boycotted the government for more than a year, threatening the delicate power-sharing agreement formed after the 1998 peace accord. Ireland's leader explained what's at stake.
We want to see the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement restored so they can provide hope for a new generation. And we'd like to see the people of Northern Ireland benefit from the rich economic opportunities available to them.
But peace is a process, Rees says. And so far, there has been progress.
The reason I'm still positive is we see the emergence and the increasing success of non-sectarian parties on the political sphere. Yes, we could be in a better place, but we really have made huge strides since 1998.
And for Biden, this visit holds personal history. Like most American families, the Bidens came from another continent. This village was the start of their very American story.
The Irish left here during oppression and famine, went to Scranton and worked in the coal mines and on the railways, really difficult jobs, but with pride and enthusiasm for a better life. And they were able to provide that for their people, and that has come full circle now with a son of Ballina, an ancestor of Ballina, becoming US president and sitting in the Oval Office.
On Friday, that son of Ballina will speak before residents of this small town, but his words will be heard around the world. Anita Powell, VOA News, Washington.
It's time for a technology report, and joining us now is our tech reporter, Paul Ndiho. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Esther. Curacell is a Nigerian fintech company connecting health insurers and hospitals. It aims to bring modern insurance infrastructure to emerging markets. For more insight, I'm joined by Henry Muscat, the founder and CEO of the Lagos-based firm. Hello, Muscat.
Thank you, Paul. Happy to be here.
Great to be here. Thank you. First and foremost, you are one of the featured speakers today. You're likely to speak today at the Fintech Summit here in Washington, D.C. What are you going to be talking about?
So I'm part of the panel with a few other fintech founders and operators. And we're talking about the next frontier for what's next for African fintech. So we're going to be looking at a few topics around what's happening right now in fintech in Africa, especially with the VC downturn, with where the market is. We're going to be looking at what the future will look like in the next few years, the next couple of months, and then the next few years. Yeah.
So your company, Curacell, is one of the leading fintech companies in Nigeria. You've transcended borders. You are operating in several African countries. What are you doing exactly?
Yes. So at Curacell, our sort of like mission is to be able to build out the infrastructure that powers insurance and get more Africans and even people in emerging markets insured or included. Currently in Africa, right about 2.5%, insurance penetration is around 2.5%. That's more than 40% lower than the global average. And so for us at Curacell, our role within that ecosystem is to provide technology, innovative technology that might exist in other places that might be more tailored for our markets, to see that we can help insurance companies, we can help other people within the ecosystem operate and thrive.
One of the things that a lot of people talk about when it comes to insurance is fraud.
Yes.
What kind of technology do you have in place maybe to combat that or to fight that?
Yeah. So at Curacell, we have obviously we're a platform where sort of like thing is a platform with a couple of products, and one of our products is something called Curacell Detection, where we're helping some of the biggest insurance companies like AXA, Liberty, Jubilee detect fraud using artificial intelligence. And this is a very important problem, because one of the biggest problems with insurance is claims, right? Insurance companies don't pay claims on time. And the reason they don't do that is because some of the claims are fraudulent. And so they spend quite a long time trying to figure out which ones are real, which ones are fraudulent. And so at Curacell, we provide them with the technology to be able to automate that process and then detect fraud much faster. So this is one of our products. We also have a second product where we're enabling businesses, embed insurance, banks, fintechs into their products.
You've been going across the continent trying to preach this gospel here, trying to tell people the importance of insurance. In which countries are you currently operating?
Yeah. So we're currently in 8 markets at the moment. So obviously Nigeria is our home market, but we're also in Ghana. We're in Kenya, we're in Uganda, we're in Tanzania, we're slightly in Rwanda these days, we're in Senegal, we're in Cote d'Ivoire, and more recently we're also expanding into like Egypt and Morocco. We actually have some early customers in Egypt at the moment.
Any predictions for 2023?
Yeah, so obviously we're very excited about like embedded insurance. And so we think that the sort of like the future of where insurance is going is where you don't even know it's there, right? You don't have to go and buy a car and then you go somewhere else to buy insurance. When you're buying the car, it comes with insurance bundled, and that's what we're looking forward to.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Thank you so much, Henry, for being here. Henry Mascata is co-founder and CEO of the Lagos-based Curacell. That's today's Tech Report. Back to you, Esther.
Thanks, Paul. Be sure to join Paul Ndiho every Wednesday for his Tech Report right here on Africa 54. And thank you, viewers, for joining us on Africa 54. See you tomorrow.